Character. Name, Evelyn Parker. Age 28, Part 1, The Mockery. They said I'd never be more than a joke, but jokes can turn into legends. Growing up in the cracked sidewalks of East Harlem, poverty wasn't just a condition, it was a sentence. Our apartment was a tiny box with peeling paint and a bathroom that smelled like mildew. My mother worked 2 jobs, barely making enough to put food on the table. My father left when I was 6, leaving behind a silence that stretched longer than the nights without heat. From the very beginning, the world seemed determined to remind me of my place. "Look at Evelyn, always daydreaming," my teachers would say, eyes glazed with boredom or pity. At school, I was the girl whose clothes smelled like the thrift store, whose lunchbox carried old sandwiches because we couldn't afford more. The kids whispered, laughed behind their hands, shoved me in crowded hallways. At home, even my own sister looked down on me. One dinner, she scoffed loud enough for everyone to hear, "Why do you even bother trying? You're just a failure, Ev." My mother's tired eyes flickered, but she said nothing. That night, lying on a thin mattress on the floor, I asked the cold ceiling, "Is this all I am?" The answer echoed back, "No, not if you don't accept it." School was my escape. When the hallways were empty, I would sketch. Lines, shapes, colors spilling from my fingertips, worlds where I was powerful, admired, free. But when I dared to share my dreams, even that was met with mockery. "You want to be a designer?" The counselor laughed. "With your background, good luck." Her words felt like a slap, sharp, humiliating, but they ignited a stubborn fire inside me. Despite the cold, the hunger, the whispered insults, I pushed on. After school, I took odd jobs, washing dishes, cleaning offices, anything to save for art supplies. I watched every tutorial I could find online, devoured books from the library, and practiced late into the night. But no matter how hard I worked, the world's rejection never stopped. One summer, desperate for experience, I interned at a small design firm. The lead designer, Claire, was supposed to mentor me. Instead, she barely spoke, ignored my ideas, and dismissed my work as amateurish. One day, she caught me working on a project after hours and sneered, "Don't get too comfortable. You'll never fit in here." Her words cut deeper than any cold glance from strangers. That night, tears stained my pillow as I wondered if I was wasting my life chasing an impossible dream. But the next morning, something inside me hardened. I realized the only approval I needed was my own. I would become the designer who changed the game, not by waiting for permission, but by taking what was mine. Part 2. The Breaking Point. The cold truth settled like frost in my bones. Nobody was going to hand me a chance. If I wanted to break free from the cage I'd been born into, I had to shatter it myself. Days blurred into nights as I doubled down on my craft. I stayed late at the internship, sometimes hiding in empty conference rooms just to sketch in peace. My fingers bled from exhaustion, my eyes burned from staring at screens long past midnight, but the fire inside me refused to die. Claire's sneers and dismissals echoed relentlessly in my mind. "You'll never fit in here." I replayed those words like a wound that refused to heal, but instead of breaking me, they became a challenge etched into my soul. One particularly brutal afternoon, she called me into the office, her lips twisted in that cold, cruel smile. "Evelyn," she said, voice dripping with fake concern, "why don't you quit? You're wasting everyone's time." I could feel the weight of her judgment crushing me, but I forced myself to meet her icy gaze. "I'm not here to waste time," I said, voice steady but fierce. "I'm here to learn, and I'm here to stay." She scoffed, clearly amused, then turned on her heel and walked away. But her words lit a spark I hadn't felt in months. That night, I sat at the worn kitchen table, the only light coming from a flickering bulb overhead. My hands trembled as I stared at the rejection letter from the design school I'd applied to. "Not a good fit," they said. "Too little experience." The bitter taste of failure filled my mouth. I wanted to scream, to collapse into tears, to give up. But deep inside, a voice whispered, "If not now, when?" The next morning, I made a choice. I quit the internship. It wasn't because I gave up. It was because I refused to be a footnote in someone else's story. I was done begging for scraps. It was time to write my own. I started freelancing, pitching ideas to small businesses, designing logos for local shops, and slowly building a portfolio that was uniquely mine. Money was tight. Some days I ate stale bread for dinner, my stomach aching with hunger. Nights were the coldest, curled up in a cheap hostel bed, dreaming of a future that seemed just out of reach. But every setback was a lesson, every no a stepping stone. One afternoon, an email arrived from a startup founder impressed by my work. They wanted me to design their entire brand identity. It wasn't a fortune, but it was a start. I poured every ounce of myself into that project, working around the clock, sacrificing sleep and social life. When the final design was unveiled, the founder called me. "Evelyn, this is incredible. You've captured our vision perfectly." Hearing those words, so genuine and warm, I felt my heart swell with a quiet pride. For the first time, I realized maybe, just maybe, I was on my way. But the road ahead was far from smooth. A friend I'd trusted since childhood, Mia, saw my progress and something inside her twisted. One evening, she confronted me. "You think you're better than us now, don't you?" she spat, eyes dark. I shook my head, hurt bleeding through my voice. "I never thought that. I'm just trying to survive." She laughed bitterly. "Survive? You're selling out, Evelyn. You're forgetting where you came from." Her words hit harder than Claire's insults. Was I really betraying my roots? Or was I simply fighting for a life I deserved? That night, I cried for the girl I used to be, the one who felt invisible, unloved, and forgotten. But I also cried for the woman I was becoming, someone who refused to be crushed by circumstance. Part 3. The Climb. The whispers followed me everywhere. The snide comments from old friends, the disapproving looks from family at holiday gatherings, the silent judgment in every glance. They saw my rise as betrayal, my success as something to mock rather than celebrate. But I was done hiding. Every insult, every cold shoulder was fuel for the fire that burned inside me. The startup project was just the beginning. Words spread slowly, then like wildfire, about the girl from East Harlem who could turn ideas into gold. Offers came in, small businesses, then bigger companies, then finally a mid-sized agency that wanted to bring me on full-time. I knew I was taking a risk. Agencies were full of polished faces, privileged backgrounds, and stiff competition, but I believed in my vision. Raw, authentic, fearless. The first day at the agency, I walked in with my portfolio tucked under my arm, my heart pounding like a drum in my chest. The lead creative director, a sharply dressed man named Greg, glanced at my work and raised an eyebrow. "Where did you learn this?" he asked, voice skeptical. I swallowed hard. "From everywhere. From life. From hard lessons." He smirked. "We'll see if you can keep up." The weeks that followed were brutal. I worked 12-hour days, soaking up feedback, facing harsh critiques, navigating office politics. But with each project, I found my voice, a style that was unmistakably mine. One evening, after a marathon session working on a major campaign, Greg called me into his office. "I have to admit, you're something else," he said, a rare note of respect in his voice. "We're sending you to pitch to one of our biggest clients next week." My chest tightened with a mix of nerves and excitement. That night, I stayed up crafting the presentation, rehearsing until my voice cracked. The day of the pitch arrived. The room was filled with executives, all expecting the usual polished but forgettable proposal. When I spoke, I didn't just present designs. I told a story about resilience, about dreams born in hardship, about the power of authenticity. By the end, the room was silent. Then the CEO leaned forward. "This is exactly what we need," he said. "You've got the contract." I left that meeting shaking, overwhelmed but victorious. News traveled fast. Suddenly, the same people who had mocked me wanted to connect. Classmates from school, distant relatives, even Mia. One afternoon, my phone buzzed with a message from my sister. "Can we talk? I want to understand you." I stared at the screen, heart pounding. The girl who once called me a failure now wanted a conversation. When we met, her eyes were filled with tears and regret. "I was jealous," she admitted. "I thought you'd leave us behind." I reached across the table, my voice steady. "I never wanted to leave you. I just wanted you to see me." That moment was both healing and heartbreaking, a reminder that success isn't just about wealth or status, but connection. Part 4. The Return. The city lights blurred outside my apartment window as I sat alone, reflecting on how far I had come. From the girl who once begged for scraps of kindness, to to the woman leading creative campaigns that shaped brands worldwide. Yet, despite the triumphs, a quiet emptiness lingered beneath the surface. The scars of abandonment and betrayal weren't so easily healed. I remembered the night Dad threw those words at me during dinner. "You'll never amount to anything." The room had erupted in laughter, their voices like knives. I could still feel that suffocating weight, the sting of every mocking glance. But now, with a prestigious award on my shelf and a name that commanded respect, something shifted. The past was no longer a prison but a chapter. Painful, yes, but part of the story that defined me. Then came the calls. Old faces resurfacing from the shadows of my past, each carrying different masks. First was Claire, the ruthless former colleague who once crushed my spirit with a sneer. Her email was short, carefully polite. "Congratulations on your recent success. Perhaps we can reconnect professionally." I stared at the screen, the memories of her cold dismissal burning bright. Part of me wanted to slam the door shut, but another part recognized the power I now held. I drafted a response, measured and clear. "Thank you for your message. I believe our paths are best kept separate. Wishing you the best." Next was Mia, my childhood friend whose jealousy had turned venomous. She called late one night, voice shaky. "Evelyn, I was wrong. I never stopped admiring you." I wanted to believe her, but the years of betrayal echoed louder. "Admiration is not enough," I said softly. "Trust is earned." The conversation ended in silence, a tentative bridge between past and future. Then came the family, the ones who once ignored me, who whispered behind my back. They appeared at a gala where I was being honored, faces flushed with envy and awkward smiles. My sister approached, tears glistening. "I'm proud of you," she whispered. I nodded, the conflict swirling inside me, forgiveness mingled with guarded pain. Later that night, I stood before a mirror, gazing at the woman I'd become. The scars of rejection were still there, etched deep, but so was resilience. I realized that true power wasn't just in wealth or influence. It was in owning my story, flaws and all. The past could not define me, but I could define how it shaped me. And with that, a new chapter began. Part 5. The New Beginning. Standing at the edge of the rooftop garden, overlooking the city that had once seemed so distant and unreachable, I felt a profound calm settle over me. The harsh winds brushed against my face, carrying whispers of my past, but also promises of what lay ahead. I thought about that dinner years ago, the night when Dad's voice cut through the silence like a blade. "You're just a failure." Everyone laughed, and I shrank beneath their judgment, convinced that those words would be the final echo of my life. But they weren't. They were a spark. Now, as I looked down at the bustling streets filled with people chasing their dreams, I realized how far I had come, not just in fortune, but in spirit. The awards, the contracts, the glossy magazine features, they were milestones, yes, but the real victory was reclaiming myself. I had transformed from the girl who was mocked, ignored, and dismissed into a woman who commanded respect and owned her worth. The phone buzzed in my pocket, a message from my sister. "Dinner? I want to hear your story." For the first time, I didn't hesitate. I replied, "Tomorrow night, my place." I knew this was not just about reconciliation. It was about healing, about bridging the gap between past pain and future hope. I'd built walls to protect myself, but now I was ready to let someone in. Turning away from the city lights, I thought of Claire, Mia, and everyone who had doubted me. Their voices still lingered in my mind, but they no longer held power. I chose to forgive, not for their sake, but for mine. Because forgiveness isn't weakness, it's freedom. I closed my eyes and breathed deeply, the weight of years lifting from my shoulders. This was more than a new chapter. It was my rebirth, and no one, not even my past, could take that away.